The Varric delegation arrived 3 minutes ahead of schedule, which the analysts on Earth's First Contact Coordination Committee said was statistically significant. The Varric did not do anything by accident. Staff Sergeant Marcus Dell stood at parade rest inside Hangar 6 of the Nairobi International Contact Facility a building that hadn't existed 4 years ago, before the Varric's first transmission reached the ISS at 3:17 Universal Time Coordinated on a Tuesday morning that no one alive would ever forget. Now it was the most secure structure on Earth, buried under 17 layers of bureaucracy, 200 armed personnel, and enough electromagnetic shielding to block a small star's worth of radiation. None of which would matter if the Varric decided today was not a diplomatic visit. Marcus kept his face neutral. He was good at that. 12 years in the Army, 2 combat deployments, 3 years assigned to the Interspecies Security Division a job that hadn't existed 5 years ago either had given him a face that could hold still while everything behind it moved. He was thinking about the briefing. The Varric Queen they translated her title as Sovereign Who Speaks for the Living, but the committee had quietly shortened it to Queen for logistical reasons. Was coming herself. That was unprecedented. The Varric had sent envoys for 4 years. Lower-ranked functionaries, scientists, translators. Always professional. Always distant. Always watching with those deep-set amber eyes that sat in pairs on either side of their elongated skulls, giving them nearly 360 degrees of vision. They saw everything. And today, the Queen was coming to negotiate the terms of what the committee publicly called the Cooperation Framework and what Marcus's commanding officer, Colonel Yoon, privately called * either the best trade deal in human history or the opening ceremony of our extinction. * No pressure. The hangar doors began to move. They were massive euro 40 meters wide, designed to accommodate Varric shuttle geometry, which tended toward wide, flat forms that reminded humans of manta rays crossed with surgical instruments. The shuttle that emerged from the morning light was no different, except for its size. It was larger than anything the Varric had sent before, its hull the color of old bone, etched along the leading edges with what the xenolinguistics team believed were ancestral markings. Declarations of identity. This is who I am. This is where I come from. Marcus understood that impulse. The shuttle settled onto the landing pad with a hiss of equalizing pressure. For a moment nothing happened. The committee observers behind the glass partition on the mezzanine level shifted. General Okoro, head of Earth Security Command, did not shift. She stood like a pillar and watched. Then the hatch opened. The Varric Queen stepped out first, which surprised everyone in the room except Marcus, who had read the anthropological report suggesting Varric royalty demonstrated strength through personal exposure rather than hiding behind protocol. She was tall nearly 2.5 meters and wore a garment that covered her from throat to ankle in layered panels of deep green and silver. Her face was angular, her amber eyes steady. She moved with the economy of someone who had spent a lifetime being watched and had made peace with it. Behind her came the delegation, 6 advisors in formal attire, 2 security personnel in close formation, a translator unit hovering at shoulder height, and Marcus noticed the child immediately. It was small. Maybe a meter tall if that. Young by any measure the xenobiologists estimated Varric developmental stages, and this one had the proportionally larger eyes and slightly unsteady gait of an immature individual. The child wore simple clothing compared to the Queen's formal layers. It held one of the Queen's hands with both of its own. Nobody had mentioned a child in the briefing. Marcus heard Colonel Yoon's voice in his earpiece. Dell. You seeing this? Yes, sir. Nobody panic. It was not the most reassuring order Marcus had ever received. The Queen stopped at the designated reception point, 15 meters from the human welcoming line. Her translator unit emitted a tone low, resonant and then spoke in accented but precise English, the result of 4 years of linguistic exchange. I am Sovereign Varricashal Kethra. I come to speak of futures. She paused. I bring my daughter, Sathaka, because I do not speak of futures without the one who must live in them. Silence. General Okoro stepped forward. We are honored, Sovereign. I am General Amara Okoro, Earth Security Command. She gestured to her right. Ambassador Chen will lead the formal proceedings. We have prepared comfortable quarters for your delegation. The Queen's eyes moved not her head, just her eyes, that uncanny lateral sweep across the human line. Marcus was third from the left. He felt the gaze land on him the way you feel direct sunlight when clouds part. Not hostile. assessing. He did not flinch. The child, Sathaka, was looking at things. The hangar lights. The camera rigs mounted near the ceiling. The moisture on the concrete floor from where the air system struggled with Nairobi's morning humidity. She looked at things the way children look at everything, with the assumption that all of it was interesting. Then she looked at Marcus. He was the only member of the security detail not in dress uniform. His role was close protection civilian clothes, no insignia, positioned to respond rather than impress. The protocol team had specifically requested someone who could blend with the background. He was background. But the child was staring at him. Marcus kept his face neutral. The child tilted her head. It was such a human gesture that several of the committee observers later reported it made them uncomfortable. The reminder that intelligent species sometimes converge on similar expressions of curiosity not because of shared biology, but because curiosity itself has a shape. She tugged her mother's hand. The Queen looked down. Some exchange occurred. Not in English, something softer, clipped, private. The translator unit did not render it. Family language, Marcus assumed. The things you say to a child that don't require audience. The Queen looked up. The formal proceedings began. Delegates moved. Doors opened. The machinery of diplomacy, enormous and intricate, began to turn. Marcus fell into step with the security formation, positioned to the outer flank, eyes moving in practiced patterns. Entry points, sight lines, the delegation spacing, the location of every human in the room. He did not look back at the child. But he could feel, with the particular awareness that years of close protection work instills the sense of who is watching whom that she was still looking at him. He didn't know what to do with that. He filed it away the way soldiers file things that don't fit into existing categories, into a mental drawer labeled, "Figure this out later, and kept walking. The negotiations were beginning. So, it turned out, was something else. The formal sessions took place in the conference suite a room designed by a committee of psychologists, architects, xenobiologists, and one very stressed interior designer who had been given 6 months and an impossible brief. Create a space where humans and Varek can sit across a table from each other without either side feeling like prey. The result was a room with no sharp corners, lighting calibrated to flatter both species' visual ranges, chairs on the human side and raised platform seats on the Varek side, and a central table made of reclaimed wood from a forest in British Columbia that the committee had selected because, as one analyst put it, showing them we keep some things alive feels like a message worth sending. Marcus stood near the east wall. His job for the duration of formal sessions was simple and exhausting. Be invisible, stay alert, trust no one including himself. The child was not in the conference suite. She had been escorted, along with 2 Varek attendants, to a secondary room, the facility called the Comfort Suite designed as a neutral, low-stress space for non-participating delegation members. It had been furnished with items the advanced team believed might suit Varek preferences. Indirect lighting, a variety of surface textures, temperature controls, and a filtered view of the outdoor gardens. No one had anticipated the child specifically. They had done the best they could. 20 minutes into session 1, Colonel Yoon's voice appeared in Marcus's ear. Del. Small situation. Non-emergency. Sir. The Queen's kid. The attendants say she's asking for something. They can't figure out what. She keeps pointing at the door. Marcus waited. The translator unit they have with them is the secondary model. Lower fidelity. She might be trying to communicate something that isn't rendering correctly. What does she want? That's the question. The attendants are stressed. They don't want to interrupt the Queen. You're on the approved personnel list for the Comfort Suite. Can you go take a look? Marcus looked at the room. At the long table. At the Queen, who sat across from Ambassador Chin with the stillness of a chess piece that had not yet decided which way to move. At the 8 other humans and 6 other Varek arranged on either side of a negotiation that would shape, for better or worse, what the next century looked like. On my way, he said. The Comfort Suite was down a corridor and around a corner. Marcus paused at the door, knocked a habit, a small one of those courtesies that become automatic and entered. The room was dim. The Varek attendants, 2 individuals he had not been introduced to, stood near the far wall looking collectively and unmistakably like people who were trying very hard not to appear concerned and failing. The secondary translator unit hovered between them, its indicator light blinking in a rhythm Marcus associated with processing difficulty. The child Sathaka sat on the floor near the garden window. Not distressed. not crying. Sitting with the particular focused calm of a young person who has decided that waiting is acceptable but that the thing being waited for is non-negotiable. She looked up when Marcus entered. He stopped a few meters away and crouched down. Eye level. Something his mother had taught him when he was young. Asterisk, when you talk to a child, you get down to where they are. You don't make them come up to you. Asterisk. He looked at the attendants. Has she eaten? Is she in any discomfort? The translator processed. One of the attendants responded, she has refused refreshment. She is not in pain. She has been requesting €1, a pause, the unit blinking €1, a specific individual. We do not have sufficient context for the request. Marcus looked at the child. She was looking at him with those amber eyes €1, wide, the way young eyes always are, full of a specificity that adults lose, the ability to look at one thing as though it is the only thing in the world. She said something. Soft. 3 syllables, maybe 4. The translator rendered it imprecisely, asterisk, the one who watches carefully. Asterisk. Marcus was quiet for a moment. She was looking at me, he said. Not to anyone in particular. In the hangar. She was looking at me. One of the attendants said something to the other. Marcus caught the tone if not the content. Surprise, reassessment. He looked at Sathaka. Hi, he said. She tilted her head. The same gesture as before. He sat down on the floor. It was not a dignified thing for a staff sergeant of the United States Army assigned to a mission of global diplomatic importance to do. He sat down on the floor of the comfort suite of the Nairobi International Contact Facility and settled his back against the wall and looked at the garden through the filtered window. After a moment, Sathaka scooted across the floor and sat beside him. Not touching. A few inches of space. But beside him. Marcus kept his hands where she could see them. Open. Relaxed. One of the first things they had taught in the ISD training program. Asterisk, you cannot fake non-aggression to a species that evolved reading body language across 30 meters of open terrain. Mean it or don't bother. Asterisk. He meant it. They sat there, the human soldier and the alien queen's daughter, and looked at the garden. A bird landed on a branch outside. Sathaka made a small sound €1, not a word, not a question. An observation. The sound of noticing. Marcus nodded. Yeah, he said quietly. I see it too. The attendants exchanged another look. In the translator's imprecise rendering, what passed between them was, asterisk, she's calm. Asterisk. And the other, asterisk, she trusts him. Asterisk. The attendants did not understand why. Neither, entirely, did Marcus. But the child sat beside him and watched the garden and the bird in the garden, and the knot of anxiety that had been in the room when Marcus entered slowly, almost imperceptibly, loosened. Outside, the negotiations continued. In here, something smaller and stranger and perhaps more important had begun. By the 3rd day of negotiations, Marcus had learned 11 words of Varrock. This was not because he was a linguist. He was not. He had a functional working knowledge of Swahili, decent Spanish, and enough Arabic to be polite and to understand when someone was not being polite back. His facility with languages was adequate rather than exceptional. But Sathaka was a patient teacher, and she had decided €1, with the unilateral certainty of children everywhere €1, that this was a project she was undertaking. It had started with the bird. On the second morning, he had been assigned to the comfort suite again €1. Colonel Yoon had made this a standing arrangement, at the quiet suggestion of the Varrock senior attendant, who had communicated through the formal translation channels that the young one rests better when the careful watcher is present €1, and a different bird had landed on the same branch, and Sathaka had said something and then looked at him expectantly. Varith, the translator had rendered it. Asterisk, small living flying thing. Asterisk. Marcus had pointed at the bird. Bird, he said. She had repeated it. Asterisk bared. Asterisk almost. The Varrock had a slightly different consonant inventory. But almost. He had pointed at her. Sathaka. She had pointed at him, a question in the gesture. Marcus, he said. She tried it. Asterisk Marcus. Asterisk better than bird. She seemed pleased with this. By the 3rd day she had given him 11 words. The general terms for watching, sitting, outside, tree, light, water, waiting, safe, not safe, here and together. It was, Marcus noted privately, a vocabulary almost entirely concerned with environment and proximity. Where are we? What is around us? Is it safe? Are we together? The vocabulary of a species that had, somewhere in its evolutionary history, understood that awareness of environment was survival. He hadn't mentioned this to the analysts. They had enough to process. But he thought about it. He thought about it because the negotiations by day 3 were not going well. He knew this not from briefings his clearance level got him the security summaries, not the diplomatic content but from the way Colonel Yoon's jaw set differently each morning, and the way Ambassador Chin moved through the corridors with the precise, controlled walk of someone holding something very heavy. The cooperation framework had 17 major points of contention. He had gathered this from fragments. The Varec wanted exclusive transit rights through a corridor of near-Earth space that humans were not prepared to cede without understanding why. The humans wanted technology exchanges that the Varec were unwilling to provide without assurances the humans were not yet prepared to make. Both sides were negotiating around something larger and unspoken some calculation of risk and trust that neither could quite make aloud. Trust. On the afternoon of day 3, Sathaka did something unexpected. They had developed a routine. Marcus would arrive, sit near the window, and she would settle nearby with the focused calm she always brought. Sometimes they watched the garden. Sometimes she showed him things objects from her personal effects that the attendants allowed her to keep, small and precisely made, purpose unclear to Marcus but clearly significant to her, handled with the care children reserve for things that matter. This afternoon, she reached into a small pouch at her side and produced something Marcus had not seen before. It was roughly spherical, slightly smaller than a tennis ball, its surface covered in shallow indentations that caught the light differently depending on angle. It looked old. The indentations were not random they were too regular, too deliberate. She held it out to him. He looked at it. Looked at her. For me. She said something. The translator rendered it, hold. Just hold. He took it carefully. It was lighter than it looked. Warm, which surprised him either the material retained heat or Varec body temperature ran higher than estimated. The indentations under his fingers had a texture that was oddly satisfying, like a worry stone taken to a logical extreme. Sathaka watched him hold it with an expression he had been learning to read, the slight widening of the inner eye, the almost imperceptible lean forward. He had catalogued this as focused interest without alarm. Something like the human expression of this matters, I want to see what happens. What is it? He asked. She said a word. The translator worked, comfort known object. Then, slower, more deliberate, she added something that the translator rendered in fragments. The thing you hold, when where, is not familiar. Marcus turned the object over in his hands. A comfort object. The Varec equivalent of a stuffed animal, a worn blanket, the particular possession that children carry into unfamiliar places because it is a piece of the familiar world made portable. She had brought it to an alien planet for the most consequential diplomatic meeting in either species' history. And she was letting him hold it. Marcus was 34 years old and had not cried in front of anyone since his father's funeral. He did not cry now. But something moved in his chest not sentiment exactly, something more structural like a beam shifting, a load redistributing. He held the object carefully and said in Varec, the word she had taught him that morning. Together, he said. She made a sound he had not heard from her before short, soft, slightly aspirated. The attendants across the room both went still. He glanced at them. One of them spoke very quietly to the translator. The translator said, that sound. It means, the closest human translation would be, yes exactly, that is the right word. It was, Marcus thought, a very efficient sound. He held the comfort object and they sat together and outside the garden was full of late afternoon light. And somewhere down the corridor 2 civilizations were trying to find a language for trust that the diplomats and the politicians and the analysts had not yet located. He thought he might be sitting next to it. On the evening of day 4, the Queen asked to speak with Marcus directly. This was not a small request. It went through 3 levels of protocol review, a consultation with the committee's xenopsychology team, a conversation between Colonel Yoon and General Okoro that Marcus was not in the room for but whose aftermath he could read clearly in the colonel's face, and a security sweep of the private meeting room that took 45 minutes. Marcus spent those 45 minutes in the bathroom of the duty room, looking at himself in the mirror. He was not a diplomat. He was not a scientist or an analyst or a policymaker. He was a soldier assigned to a protection detail, and the fact that a planetary sovereign wanted to speak with him privately was so far outside his professional framework that he had given up trying to locate it on any map he possessed. He thought about what Colonel Yoon had said, you don't have to go. I want to be clear about that. This is voluntary. He thought about what General Okoro had said, which was more direct. Del. You're the only human on Earth who has a functional relationship with that child. If the Queen wants to talk to you, you should talk to her. That's not an order. That's a statement of what I believe is true. Asterisk. He went. The private meeting room was small by the facility's standards, €, designed for side conversations, one-on-ones, the informal diplomacy that the formal tables couldn't accommodate. The Queen was already seated when Marcus entered. No advisors. No formal attendants. One translator unit, positioned unobtrusively near the ceiling. And Sathaka sitting beside her mother, holding the comfort object. Marcus stopped. Then he walked to the chair across the table, pulled it out and sat down. The Queen looked at him for a long moment. Marcus returned the gaze. He had made his peace with those amber eyes by now, €, the way they held still while everything around them moved, the way they contained patience, the way deep water contains cold. My daughter speaks of you, the Queen said. The translator rendered it smoothly, €. She was using the primary unit, and her English, while still accented, had improved noticeably over 4 days. The Varek apparently were fast. I hope positively, Marcus said. She says you are Kethavar. Pause. The translator will render this as safe to be near. It is an assessment that Varek young make instinctively. We do not dismiss it. I'm glad she's comfortable. Are you? Yes, he said. No hesitation. She's a child in an unfamiliar place. I know what that feels like. Not diplomatically. Just €, the experience of being somewhere that doesn't make sense yet and finding something that helps it make sense. The Queen was quiet. Then, how do you know what this experience is for a Varek child? I don't, Marcus said. I know what it is for a human child. I'm extrapolating. I could be completely wrong. Something shifted in the Queen's expression. Marcus filed it without naming it, €. He didn't have enough data yet. The negotiations, the Queen said. You know they are difficult. I know they're not resolved yet. My advisors tell me the humans fear what they cannot verify. That you are unwilling to extend trust without proof. She paused. My advisors are correct. I do not say this as criticism. It is accurate. Marcus said nothing. My advisors also tell me this is rational. That a species that extends trust without verification does not survive long enough to reach the stars. She looked at Sathaka briefly. My people have a different phrase for this dynamic. We call it the long silence, €, the gap between first knowledge of another species and the moment when you understand enough to act. Every intelligent species that has survived contact has had to cross the long silence. How do most species cross it? Marcus asked. The Queen looked at him. Usually, she said, something unexpected happens. Marcus held that for a moment. She chose you, the Queen said. My daughter. You did nothing to attract her attention, €. The briefing material my advanced team prepared was explicit that your role was to be unnoticed. She noticed you regardless. Pause. Do you know why? No, Marcus said. I've wondered. I asked her. The Queen glanced at Sathaka again, and this time her expression was entirely legible, €. Whatever else she was a mother, and the look she gave her child was a thing Marcus recognized across every cultural and species barrier without any translation at all. She said, asterisk, his eyes moved like a protector's, but his hands rested like he was not afraid of us. Asterisk. Marcus felt something behind his sternum. Precise and quiet. She's perceptive, he said. She is a child, the Queen said. Children often see the thing the adults have decided is too complicated to see. She placed her hand on the table, €, not reaching toward him, just open, resting. An offering of posture, not contact. I came here to negotiate a framework. My advisors have prepared 900 pages of position statements. We have modeled 47 scenarios. We have prepared for deception, for bad faith, for the full range of behaviors that intelligent species direct toward each other when resources and territory and survival are on the table. That sounds right, Marcus said. I did not prepare, the Queen said, for my daughter to trust a human soldier on the first day. Marcus looked at Sathaka. She was looking at the comfort object in her hands, turning it slowly, and he recognized the motion, €. She did it when she was thinking. What do you want from this conversation? Marcus asked the Queen. Not the negotiation. This conversation. The Queen was quiet long enough that Marcus counted his own breaths. 4, 5. I want to know, she said finally, whether the person my daughter trusts is the exception or the indication. Marcus thought about this carefully. I'm not exceptional, he said. I'm pretty average actually. Solid record, no commendations that weren't earned by the whole team, 2 court costs for parking violations. The reason I'm in this room is that someone decided they needed a person whose job was to be calm and unreadable, and I happen to be good at that. Then why does she trust you? Because I sat down on the floor, Marcus said. And I didn't make her come to me. The Queen looked at him. That's it, he said. That's the whole thing. I got down to where she was. A long silence. An indication, the Queen said softly. Marcus held her gaze. I hope so, he said. I genuinely hope so. Day 6 arrived like weather a euro, the kind that had been building for days without anyone saying it aloud. The committee's overnight analysis summary, which Marcus received in sanitized form, used phrases like significant divergence on core mechanisms and asterisk, both delegations expressing firm positional anchoring. Asterisk Colonel Yoon, who had not slept, translated this for the security team at 0600. Asterisk, they're stuck. Both sides. And the window we have for this visit is closing. Asterisk. The Varec delegation was scheduled to depart in 36 hours. The Queen had other commitments a euro, not performative ones but real ones, the kind that governing an interstellar civilization apparently produced in abundance. If the framework wasn't initialed before departure, the next opportunity for a summit of this level was estimated at 18 months minimum. 18 months was a long time for two civilizations circling each other. Marcus heard all of this and went to the comfort suite. Sathaka was already awake. This was typical a euro, the Varec, the biological team had noted, operated on a sleep cycle that ran about 90 minutes shorter than the human standard, and Sathaka seemed shorter still. She was at the window when Marcus arrived, watching the garden in the early light, and she turned when he entered with the expression he had labeled, present, calm, curious. He sat down. She moved to her usual spot beside him. For a while neither of them did anything. This had become possible a euro, the comfortable silence, the kind that requires trust to maintain, the kind children can fall into naturally because they haven't yet learned that silence must be filled. Then Sathaka said something. The translator, asterisk, the large ones are troubled. Asterisk. Marcus looked at her. Yeah, he said. They are. Asterisk, the words are not fitting together. Asterisk. He thought about that. That's actually exactly right. The words they're using don't fit together well yet. She was quiet. Then she said something longer, more complex. The translator worked at it, indicator light flickering. Asterisk, when the words do not fit, you find the thing that is true, before the words. Asterisk. Marcus stared at the garden for a moment. Can you say that again? She repeated it. The translator's second attempt. Asterisk, find what is true first. Words come after. Asterisk. He sat with that. He thought about the framework. About transit rights and technology exchanges and the 17 points of contention and the 900 pages of position statements. He thought about two civilizations that had found each other across the long silence and were now sitting across a table trying to translate their fears into a language that the other side could sign their name to. He thought about a child who had looked at him in a hangar and decided, on some level below language, that he was Kethavar. Safe to be near. He thought about what was true before the words. He took out his personal notebook a euro, a paper one, a habit his grandfather had given him, because screens can be hacked but paper is just paper a euro, and he wrote something down. Not for himself. For a different audience. He wrote for 20 minutes. Sathaka watched him without asking questions. When he was done he read it back to himself twice. Then he asked the attendants to send a message to Colonel Yoon. The colonel read Marcus's note in 4 minutes and then called him. You understand this isn't your lane, Del? Yes, sir. You understand that if I take this to the ambassador and it goes badly, your career in the ISD ends in a very specific way? Yes, sir. Pause. Where did this come from? Marcus looked at Sathaka, who was drawing shapes on the fogged window glass with one finger. Patterns that might have been language, might have been art, might have been both a euro. He hadn't worked that out yet. Observation, he said. What Marcus had written was not a diplomatic proposal. He was not qualified to write diplomatic proposals. What he had written was a question a euro, a single question, phrased as simply as he could manage, that he believed both delegations needed to answer before any of the 17 points of contention could be resolved. Asterisk, what is the thing each side is actually afraid of? Not what the position statements say. The actual fear. The one that doesn't go into the document because putting it in the document makes it real. Asterisk. He had then written in a second paragraph, asterisk, I'm not saying answer it publicly. I'm saying, until both rooms know what the real fear is, you're negotiating the wrong thing. Asterisk. He had written in a third paragraph, asterisk, The Varric child told me, find what is true first. Words come after. I think she's right. Asterisk. Colonel Yoon took the note to General Okoro. General Okoro took it to Ambassador Chin. Ambassador Chin, who had been a diplomat for 30 years and had participated in 11 major international treaties, read it twice and said nothing for a while. Then she asked to speak privately with the Queen's lead advisor. What happened in that room Marcus was never officially told. He had not expected to be. He had done the thing he could do, which was notice and translate what he noticed into something that might be useful, and pass it to the people whose job it was to act on it. That was close protection when you stripped it down. You watch. You see what others don't. You intervene before the thing becomes irreversible. He sat with Sathaka and watched her draw patterns on the glass. What is that? He asked, pointing. She said a word. The translator, asterisk, home as remembered. Asterisk. He looked at the patterns. They were delicate, intricate, and already beginning to fade as the glass warmed and the fog retreated. Are you homesick? He asked. She considered this a euro. He could see her working through the concept, checking it against her own interior. Then she said something. Asterisk, I carry home. I do not miss it. It is here. Asterisk. She touched her chest. Marcus looked at the fading patterns on the glass. He thought about what it meant to carry something so completely that distance couldn't remove it. He thought that was probably the thing both delegations needed to find out about each other. The breakthrough came on the morning of day 7, and it did not look like a breakthrough. Marcus was not in the room. He was told about it afterward, in pieces, by Colonel Yoon and eventually by Ambassador Chin herself, who sought him out specifically because she felt he deserved to know. What had happened was this. Ambassador Chen's private session with the Queen's lead advisor had surfaced something that none of the position statements had contained. The Varric were not pursuing this framework primarily for the transit rights or the technology exchanges. Those were real concerns, practical ones, but they were not the spine of it. The spine of it was simpler and harder. The Varric had encountered, in their history, 2 other species that had achieved interstellar capability. One had been absorbed into the Varric political sphere through a process the Varric called alignment a euro, a word that translated cleanly but contained volumes of implication. The other had been destroyed. Not by the Varric. By themselves. A species that had reached the stars and then collapsed internally, catastrophically, in a conflict that its own technological sophistication had made unsurvivable. The Varric had watched from 3 systems away. They had calculated intervention timelines and resources and probabilities and had decided, correctly or not a euro, the Queen's advisor had said this with a stillness that suggested it was not a settled question a euro, that they could not reach the crisis fast enough to matter. They had watched a civilization extinguish itself. And then, 116 years later, they had detected human radio transmissions and had spent 40 years watching before making contact. And what they had been watching for, the thing underlying every interaction and every assessment and every careful diplomatic exchange, was a single question. Are these ones going to do the same thing? That was the fear. Not that humanity would threaten the Varric. That humanity would destroy itself before the Varric could do anything about it. The framework was not about transit rights. The framework was about staying close enough to matter if it came to that. They had come, in part, because they did not want to watch again. When Ambassador Chin told Marcus this, they were in one of the facility's smaller conference rooms, just the 2 of them and a cup of tea that neither of them was drinking. Marcus was quiet for a long time. Did they say that directly? He asked. Eventually, Chin said. It took several hours. And several very skillfully reframed questions from my team. She paused. Your question helped. The framing. What is the thing you're actually afraid of? It gave us a direction. Marcus nodded. The human side, he said. What did we say? What is our fear? Chin looked at her tea. That they're lying, she said. That the framework is a mechanism for dependency or control dressed up as cooperation. That we'll sign something that looks like partnership and find out later it was a leash. She paused. That the pattern repeats. We've done this to each other, humans have. Treaties that were never what they claimed. We know what that looks like from the inside. Both sides came in afraid of a different version of the same thing, Marcus said. Being too late. Being deceived. Yes. Marcus thought about Sathaka on the first day looking at him across the hangar. About the comfort object in her hands. About home as remembered, carried in the chest rather than grieved from a distance. What happens now? He asked. We keep talking, Chin said. But differently. The framework is still 17 points. None of them disappeared. But now we know what we're actually trying to say to each other, and that changes the language you use for it. She finally picked up her tea. She told you something, she said. Not a question. The child? Yes. Marcus nodded slowly. She told me to find what's true before the words. And she showed me what it looks like to carry something without losing it. Chin was quiet. She's very young, she said. Yes, Marcus said. Children often see the thing the adults have decided is too complicated to see. He had borrowed the Queen's phrase. It felt right. They initialed the framework at 1447 on day 8 €, a morning and a half past the original window, the Varec departure delayed by mutual and unprecedented agreement, the administrative gymnastics involved in rescheduling a sovereign's itinerary handled by people whose names would never appear in any public account of these events. Marcus was not in the signing room. He was in the garden. This had been Sathaka's idea or something close to an idea, expressed in the particular Varec child way of making intentions clear without quite stating them, which involved standing near the door to the garden with an expression of composed expectation until one of the attendants realized she was waiting to be taken outside. The garden at the Nairobi facility was not grand. It was a half-acre of deliberately native plantings, maintained by a small groundskeeping team who had been briefed, to their considerable bewilderment, on the possibility that alien dignitaries might observe their work. They had, in response, done what good groundskeepers always do. They had kept it real. Living things not manicured. Imperfect. Present. Marcus sat on a low stone bench near the center of it. Sathaka sat beside him. Not inches away this time actually beside him, close enough that he was aware of the warmth, the Varec body temperature running higher than his own, the particular reality of a different biology existing in the same space. She had the comfort object. She was not holding it the way she had on the first day with both hands tightly, the way you hold something when the world is too large and unfamiliar. She was holding it in one hand, loosely, the way you hold something you no longer need to grip. They watched a bee an actual Kenyan bee, indifferent to the diplomatic significance of its surroundings investigate a cluster of flowers nearby. Sathaka said something. The translator, which one of the attendants was running nearby, it knows what it is looking for. The bee. Marcus asked. Yes. It does not need to decide. It knows, Marcus watched the bee. Humans usually have to decide, he said. We're not great at the knowing without deciding part. She was quiet, considering this. Then, you decided. In the beginning. You decided to sit. Yeah, Marcus said. I decided to sit down. That was the knowing. Before the deciding. He looked at her. She was watching the bee, and her expression was the one he had catalogued as satisfied. The slight easing around the eyes, the quality of stillness that was different from waiting. Contentment. The specific rest of someone who is where they meant to be. Sathaka, he said. She looked at him. Thank you, he said. In English because he didn't have the Varec for it and the translator would handle it and he wanted her to hear it in his voice regardless. She looked at him for a moment with those wide amber eyes. Then she said something. The translator worked. The one who sits beside is not thanked. The one who sits beside simply, is. Marcus absorbed that. But, she added, with the particular preciseness of a child who has considered something carefully and found the right word, I am glad you are. He looked back at the garden. The bee had moved on. The flowers swayed in a light wind that came from the direction of the hills. Inside the facility, he knew, hands were being shaken and documents were being witnessed and photographs were being taken that would appear on the front page of every publication on Earth and he supposed, their equivalents wherever the Varec kept their records of important moments. Analysts were already drafting assessments. Commentators were already interpreting. The enormous machine of human response to significant events was already in motion. He sat in the garden and felt, quietly and without drama, the specific weight of a moment that would not feel like what it was until much later. Later he would try to explain it to his sister who would ask as everyone asked what it was like being there, being part of it. He would try several versions and discard all of them because they were too large or too small or too much about the events and not enough about the truth of it. He would eventually say this, there was a child who wasn't afraid of me. And I wasn't afraid of her. And somehow that mattered. His sister would say that didn't sound like much. He would say, I know. But it was. The framework was formally ratified 6 months later. The signing ceremony was held in Geneva, because Earth apparently hadn't been able to resist, and it was attended by representatives of every nation, broadcast on every platform, translated into every language. In the historical record, the framework is described as the product of careful diplomacy, extraordinary preparation, and the efforts of hundreds of skilled professionals on both sides. This is accurate. What the historical record does not capture what no official document records is the bee and the garden, and a child who decided on the basis of something older and more reliable than policy, that one particular human was safe to be near. What the historical record does not capture is a staff sergeant sitting on a floor with his hands open, and a small voice asking, in a language that was still being invented, "Together?" And an answer, simple and without hesitation, "Together." This has been the Queen's Child. Part of the HFY archive. Humanity finds a way even when the way is just sitting down. Asterisk. We do not cross the long silence with treaties alone. We cross it the way all silences are crossed with a small sound, made by someone willing to be heard. Asterisk.